Issues at Hand, powered by
Protea Hotel by Marriott Entebbe. Comfort and luxury at its best.
Welcome back from Good Morning Family. This is Issues at Hand here on Church of Uganda Family TV, and Issues at Hand is powered by Protea Hotel by Marriott Entebbe. Comfort and luxury at its best. Of course, you can have your reservations and booking on the numbers that you see on your screen. Today is a Monday, and we are going to talk about some of the things. Of course, we know that we have people who have been tagged as human rights activists. Then there is another name of human rights defenders, and then we have activists, as in activists. Someone will come and say, I'm a public health activist, I am a cancer activist. I mean, we want to understand these things, but of course we are going to look at the protection of services for human rights defenders. And with us is the executive director of National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, and he's none other than Mr. Kirenga Robert. It's a pleasure having you, sir, this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Adrian Mukalazi, and good morning to you. Thank you for hosting me.
We're excited having you here.
Sure.
Now, getting into our discussion today, we want to understand who a human rights defender is.
Thank you. A human rights defender is defined by an instrument called the United Nations Declaration on the Rights and Responsibilities of Human Rights Defenders.
Okay.
And it defines a human rights defender as any individual who, in association with others, protects and promotes human rights using non-violence. So it's your action and how you put that action that defines you as a human rights defender. So any person who speaks out on issues of human rights using non-violence qualifies to be a human rights defender. And this can be done in different ways. You can be either creating awareness on different human rights, because human rights are categorized. We have what we call civil and political rights. We have what we call the socio-economic rights, and we have what we call the group rights, like the right to development and the right to a clean and healthy environment. So if someone is talking about freedom of expression, freedom to assemble, freedom of liberty, you are talking about those are civil political rights. If you talk about the right to health, the right to education, the right to a decent job, those are socio-economic rights. When you talk about the right to a clean and healthy environment, when you talk about issues of climate justice, those are group rights. The right to development is a group right. So any person who advocates for such rights using non-violence qualifies to be called a human rights defender.
So, in other words, you don't need to be a legal practitioner for you to be a human rights defender.
Even the peasant farmer who stands up against any injustice, say land grabbing or an injustice by the criminal justice system, qualifies to, as long as what you're doing does not involve violence, you qualify. So anybody, any citizen who speaks out on any injustice, as long as even the act of speaking out does not cause violence, qualifies to be a human rights defender. So even a person who cannot speak English but can speak any local dialect, advocating for the rights of any vulnerable people, whether they are children, whether they are women, whether they are people who are sick, whether they are elderly, as long as advocating for the rights of such people and freedoms, and is doing it in a peaceful manner, that person qualifies to be a human rights defender.
Tell us about the coalition and who qualifies to be a member of the coalition, and what you do in the coalition.
So the coalition is a civil society organization that was registered and licensed in 2013. Its mission is basically to protect human rights defenders and their work. And when we talk about protecting human rights defenders, because the work of human rights defenders is a very risky job. And so when they are in crossroads with any institution or any individuals and they are under threat or attack, we come to provide them support. And the reason we provide support to human rights defenders is because they risk their lives. If we do not provide support to them, then they will just pull out of this work, which is a very noble cause. And the moment they pull out, then we will not have anybody to speak for the voiceless. So human rights defenders are always under threat. And this coalition was formed in June 2013 as a result of the protests that we had by civil activists, civil society activists who were complaining about the rampant corruption. Now, there was a movement called the Black Monday movement, where activists and those who were against corruption decided to dress on every Monday in black. Now, the response by the state then was to arrest all the leadership and all those involved, and there was no one to go and fight for their rights in terms of access to bail, in terms of legal representation, in terms of making sure that those who have been assaulted are taken to hospital and treated. So the coalition is there to help human rights defenders and also advocate for a good working environment for them.
Okay. That is interesting. Actually, you brought in a very good example of the Black Monday saga. But of course, after the Black Monday, we've seen very many other protests like Walk to Work.
Yes.
Then there was a protest where some politicians told people that because of the high prices of commodities, every lunchtime get a saucepan and a spoon and heat it.
Yes,
I mean, there is a lot of the recent where the anti-corruption march to parliament protests were
Arrested.
Where the participants were arrested. And isn't this? Sorry, do you see this as a way of frustrating your efforts as human rights defenders?
Yes and no. You see, maybe the question would be, where do human rights defenders derive the legitimacy to do what they do? If you look at Article 38 of the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda as amended, there is a provision where the citizens have the right to participate in the governance affairs of their country through either their elected representatives or through civic organizations. So civic organizations are basically these NGOs. So we have that constitutional right. The question is, how do these others who are supposed to be guarantors of the Constitution look at the work of human rights defenders? So there are some individual citizens or politicians who do not want to be held accountable. So they are the ones who would make sure that such citizens do not come out to protest peacefully against those kind of injustices, those kind of actions that are not in conformity with the laws of the Republic of Uganda. So basically, there is an enabling environment, the mere fact that people are organized and able, but when you come out to speak on these things, sometimes you get what we call reprisals. And reprisals are those negative forces that do not want to see people speak out. Those who do not think that Article 38 really empowers citizens to speak out on such injustices.
Now, the big question is that, okay, there are these defenders, they're passionate about what they're doing, but do the people who you defend even interested in the efforts?
Yes, they are, and that's why they're in this work.
Because sometimes you see very many masses coming up to oppose the efforts of human rights defenders, tagging them with very many other, this is a political move, this is a what,
yes,
and all that.
That's diversionary. So you see, I have defined for you who a human rights defender is. Any person who speaks about an injustice. An injustice can range. It can be about land grabbing, it can be about corruption, it can be a poor service delivery, like poor roads, poor health systems, lack of drugs. It can be the court systems, the corruption in the courts, the delays in accessing justice. Now, when you speak out, because of the level of ignorance of our people, a majority tend to think that when you speak out, you are becoming a political actor. Of course, politics is everything. Some people think politics is about who gets what and when and how. So you cannot rule out politics. The whole thing is that people fail to differentiate between partisan politics and politics. So when I'm questioning how Parliament allocated resources, that is politics. But when I come out and say, no, resources should go to this political organization, then shows you I'm sided, I'm a partisan activist. So the whole question is what we are doing in conformity with the law? That's what you should be asking yourself. Is what human rights defenders are doing in alignment with the laws of the country, or do they contradict the country? That's the test. That's the litmus test you should always. When you hear human rights defenders, you say, is this permissible under the laws of this country or not? And that's the test that you should apply to any human rights defender. If you see someone advocating for human rights while applying violence, and what is this violence I'm talking about? You are either destroying public property, you are closing off roads, you are burning tires, you are destroying environment, then you cease to be called a human rights defender.
We've seen on several occasions when activists come out, for example, march to parliament, or there is maybe a protest like walk to work and such protests. The big question is, why do the ringleaders of these protests come to places where there are businesses? Why don't they go to places that are free, roads that are not so busy? Why do they focus on such places?
The CBD. I think it's partly due to the frustration. Okay. So for you to have a peaceful assembly or a gathering to talk about the issues that you feel the public should know about, or a message to government, requires you, under the Public Order Management Act of 2013, to notify police. And there are guidelines that you should follow. So the first thing is you notify police of your intentions. How many are, who is organizing it, where do you want to, and then police is supposed to provide you guidance. Because in enjoying your right to demonstrate peacefully, you should not affect Mr. Mukalazi's right to movement. It should not affect Mr. Mukalazi's right to do his businesses or his job. So here is the frustration, to answer the question, that oftentimes when these human rights defenders or activists write to the police and notifying them when they want to do it, the response by the police takes time, and they wait for the last day is when they will get a response, say, no, it's not allowed. And then, or they call them, and then, so as a result of this frustration, some of these human rights will decide to do what? To take on to the streets because of the frustration. So police really has to act professional by saying, all right, we've acknowledged this letter, you want to do a demonstration, let's have a meeting, and when you have a meeting, you decide on issues, you can say, yes, you wanted to use Buganda Road. Unfortunately, Buganda Road is a busier place. You are going to lose Lumumba Avenue or any other. But those discussions never take place because of the response by the police, poor and untimely response, because they take their time to make a decision, and sometimes they will just tell you, your peaceful march has been stopped. By who? Either orders from above. So that frustration causes people to go on the street. But it would be important that really police acts professional and receives a letter and said, yes, we acknowledge the receipt of your letter, and these are the guidelines we would want you to follow, and this is what we want. Okay. But it doesn't mean that when the police doesn't respond to you take to the street and do whatever you want, because that's also against the law, and human rights defenders should be law-abiding.
There is something that is so common, especially these days, where someone says, me, I'm working for the people. And, of course, before you know, these are people with political intentions, but they want to make their name or their faces so much into people's eyes, so that when that time comes, they'll not have to put in a lot of effort. But how do you now differentiate political interests and human rights defense?
True. So here it is, and the whole thing is guided. We have very good laws, by the way. Okay. It's only that when it comes to implementation and interpretation, it's different. Interpretation and implementation. Once you misinterpret the law, then the implementation will go wrong. So NGOs or activists are governed by another piece of legislation called the NGO Act. Now, the NGO Act imposes on us what we call special obligation under Section 44. Section 44 this stops NGOs or activists from participating in political campaigns or organizations or supporting candidates. So you might be a human rights defender, but who is partisan? Now that is contrary to the law. And for me, if you are, and yet you would see someone is, what he or she is doing is actually protecting and promoting human rights. But the mere fact that he's come out, or she has come out as partisan, then that contradicts Section 44 of the NGO Act. So that's where it is. So you should be able to see. If you see, it doesn't mean that political activists are not human rights defenders. They are human rights defenders, but of a partisan character. Which means I, as a coalition that provides support to human rights defenders, I'll be having difficulty to provide Mukalazi, who comes out as a human rights defender with his yellow colors or blue colors or red colors, and comes out partisan as either a member of NUP or a member who is advocating for NUP to either take over power, or NIM to take over power, or FDC to take over power. So it shows that you are partisan now. You get it? And that's where you are in contradiction to Section 44 of the NGO Act. So you should be able to say, yes, he's a human rights defender, but he also comes out as a political activist who is belonging to political organization X, Y, and Z.
Can the two be differentiated? For example, if I have political interests,
Yes.
or I'm even a politician, I'm a councillor, I'm what, but I'm also a defender, is there a way I can differentiate the two so that the two faces can be visibly identified, that this time I come as a human rights defender and this time I come as a politician?
Yes, you can, depending on how your narrative is.
Okay.
You can come in and speak generally, but you don't show your political
side.
lineage. Yeah.
Okay.
You qualify to be as a human rights defender. Because at the end of the day, we are political animals. I vote. It doesn't mean that a human rights defender, but it is during his work as a human rights defender, is he doing partisan work? But at the end of the day, when we are going to do I have an obligation as a citizen to participate in the political affairs by casting my vote. But when I'm doing my work as a human rights defender, I do not come out with my political side or where I belong to. So that's where the difference is.
Okay. There is under the Public Order Management Act, there is something called public nuisance.
Yes.
Isn't this now contradicting with some of the activities of human rights defenders? For example, demonstrations and expression, like, because we've seen very many demonstrators arrested under that act.
As being a public nuisance.
Yes.
Yes, because you see now, that's why I told you the laws now catch up with you. Because as I indicated to you, there are guidelines if you want to do a public assembly or you want to do a peaceful demonstration. One, you have to notify the authorities. And where I talk about the authorities is the police.
Yes.
And when you notify the police, you should be able to identify who are going to demonstrate, who is in charge of this group, and where do you want to demonstrate. Now, the guidelines are such that the police is supposed to guarantee your safety and security and ensure that in your exercising these rights, you do not infringe on the rights of other citizens who are not part of your business. Now, that is where police has failed to balance. To say, okay, Robert, you want to demonstrate against the poor service deliveries in terms of infrastructure. We request that instead of using Kampala Road, which you had preferred, your preferred choice, you are going to use Nakasero Road. Those compromises never exist. You never hear police say, we allow these people to exercise their right. And we provided guidance that because of the business nature of this street they wanted to use, we guided them that instead of going to Nakivubo, you are going to go to the airstrip or you are going to use Lugogo grounds. You never see those discussions. Yet there would be alternatives. And that's why you are posing the question, why do you necessarily want to use these roads?
Yeah.
So once these people are denied, they say, okay, let's just march. Which also is contrary to the law, because now the notification was not received and maybe nothing happened. And that's how you find the clashes between the authorities and these activists.
Okay. We now have another category of people who call themselves the minority groups, and they also have activists. And some of these minority groups are groups that, I'll give an example of the LGBTQI and other groups like prostitutes who also say we have our rights as human beings. So we also have human rights that defend us. Yet you realize that for countries like Uganda, these are people who are not recognized. And do you have is there any way as a coalition you come out to rescue such people when they come out to, for example, protest over maybe discrimination or whatever, and then they are demonstrating over something that is already illegal in the country?
So, as I told you, human rights defenders are supposed to be law-abiding.
Okay.
We currently have the Anti-Homosexuality Act
Yes.
of 2010. 23?
Yeah.
23, isn't it? That's when it was passed.
Yeah.
Now, a human rights defender who is advocating for a person belonging to such category of sexual minorities or whoever you call them, whether they are on the grounds of discrimination, there is no reason why we cannot support him. Because if he's a human being and is being discriminated on the basis of his orientation, that's a human rights violation and it's against the law. What the law is saying, the acts of being Robert identified as a man having sex with Mukalasi as a fellow man. That's what the law provided. You get it? But when Mukalasi says, I was denied a job, I was denied health services on the basis that I belong to a different orientation as a result of my sexual orientation, that's a discrimination. Do you see the difference? So you cannot deny me a job at Family TV simply because of my orientation. That is criminal, and that's not allowed. But I being caught with Mr. Mukalasi in an act of that nature, that shows that then you are in conflict with the law. That's where the difference is.
Okay.
So you cannot deny someone a service or deny him an opportunity to go to a function or to deny him to access a building on the basis of his orientation. So that's where the major difference, and the people need to know it.
Yeah.
For example, you can't see me on the street and say, you are moving or dressed like an LGBT and therefore you deserve this. No, that's not what the law says. I think the law is very clear on that.
Okay. Before we go for a break, we have very many people who are in prisons. Some say they are political prisoners, but some will actually say they were imprisoned because of protests or because of demonstrations or okay, there are very many things, but mostly protests. And so is there a way the coalition is really supporting this? Because there are those who have been in prison for long.
Not really, unless such a person is clearly identified as a human rights defender. But when they were pure political act, let's look at these recent ones who have been arrested for quite long. The NUP supporters.
Yes.
So you see, they are clear there. They belong to the National Unity Platform.
Yeah.
To an ordinary person or even their own would know that what they were fighting for was the right to participate in the political affairs of their country. But because they come out as partisans who belong to a political organization, even if they were NRM, the law now ties me down. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
Section 44 of the NGO Act that stipulates that no NGO or political or organization, civic organization, shall be seen to support political candidates, campaigns, all this kind. This is where the difference is. So that law limits me to support someone, even when you see that actually what he was demonstrating for were civil political rights and he qualifies to be human. But the mere fact that he comes out as a person who belongs to this, then that law limits me from providing support. And many have criticized that, and have also criticized us as an organization.
Okay. We are taking a short commercial break. When we return, we are going to continue with this discussion. I believe that it is a discussion that you really need to follow through. For you who are watching us online on our website, on our YouTube channel, and on our app, so if you're about to leave home and you're worried, you don't want to miss out this discussion, kindly get us on our digital platforms. We are streaming live. We are taking a short commercial break. We shall be back shortly.
Issues at hand, powered by
Protea Hotel by Marriott Entebbe. Comfort and luxury at its best.
This is Church of Uganda Family TV, enriching lives. Issues at hand, powered by
Protea Hotel by Marriott Entebbe. Comfort and luxury at its best.
Welcome back from the break. This is Issues at Hand, and we're looking at the human rights defenders. Now, before the break, we actually drew a distinction between partisan activists and who human rights defenders are, and now we know. So, Mr. Chireng, getting now to our real discussion of today's topic. What are some of the protection services that you give the defenders?
Thank you, Mr. Mukala. So, depending on the threat or nature of attack a human rights defender is faced with, we provide different services.
Okay.
One, we have what we call they are all categorized under what we call emergency and protection services. So if you are arrested, for example, Mukalazi, as a human rights defender, I must be able to organize a legal representation for you right from the time of arrest. Police, to secure your police bond, make sure you have a lawyer in case you are being presented before the courts of law, to see how we can redeem your freedom. The second one, in the event that Mukalazi alleges to have been assaulted or beaten, we'll have to take you for treatment, provide medical assistance. And it could extend also to psychosocial support because you may be traumatized. If Mukalazi as a journalist says, look, even my tools of trade were destroyed or captured. My camera was taken by the police, or in the process of my arrest, they threw it down and destroyed it. So depending on that, we may either follow up with the police to ensure that your camera is returned, or if it has been destroyed to that such an extent, then we'll reach out and see whether our partners can replace that gadget. As I indicated to you earlier, the reason we provide support to human rights defenders is to enable them continue doing this. If you don't provide support to them, then they are going to pull out and say, this work is too risky, and I can do better things. So it's a risky job, and it takes guts for one to really be a human rights defender in the circumstances really that we operate in.
Okay.
So those are the kind of services. The other services will relocation. So sorry to keep on using you as an example. I'm trying to.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Edwin as an HRDB comes and says, look, besides this threats and harassment, they have sent me a text message to the effect that they know where I live. They know that I live in Kanyanya zone, this and this, and they've described my house and they really know it. I might have to relocate you for a temporary measure of about 3 months and your family, so that you are safe and secure to be able to continue doing. If I don't do it, then you will pull out, and then we'll have no human rights defenders fighting for the rest of our society.
Okay.
So those are the kind of services that we provide to them.
Okay. Those are actually good services in a sense. But now the big question is, are there any frustrations so far you have, especially in doing your work?
Yes, a lot of frustration.
Okay.
One, we did a study recently. We launched a study recently, and we were assessing the present day protection and emergency support services for human rights defenders. And the study was sampling 4 questions. 1, whether human rights defenders understand that there is emergency and protection services for them when they are under threat. 2, the study was looking at if they understand, are they available, those services? 3, they had a question of whether or not these services are accessible, because the service can be available but it's not accessible. 4 was looking at the quality of those services, and last but not least, we look at the sustainability. Are these services going to be there all throughout? And the reason we did this study is, you know that whenever we're going to an election in this country, when we have an election cycle, we have a lot of chaos, violence, human rights takes place. And that's why you find elections here are a very contentious issue.
Yeah.
So we did this study to inform our next intervention. And the findings are very interesting. you'll find that a majority, 90% of human rights defenders understand the existence of protection and emergency services. The question on availability, you'll find that below 50% those services are available. And when they are available, the percentage of the available, then access also becomes a problem. There were also issues of quality. So there's a lot of work that we need to do to ensure that human rights defenders are protected. Two, goes back to also the legal environment, the social, the context in which we operate. Both state and non-state actors seem not to understand or appreciate the work of human rights defenders. You actually appreciate the work of human rights defenders when you yourself, your rights are being violated or abused. And when it happens to you, it's when you wake up and say, yeah, really human rights defenders, because they come out to speak out on your issues. So we have a challenge that we have many state actors who have no understanding of the role of human rights defenders, just as citizens who think that, these ones are here to cause chaos, these ones are here. When you speak out on the rights of those who are, but when it is your turn, whose freedoms and rights have been violated, and then that's when you wake up and say, oh, these people are really necessary for our society. Yeah. So those are the kind of frustration we feel. But also, human rights organizations like ours are facing challenges like resources, access to resources. So you know what it means for me to hire for you a lawyer. If you yourself cannot afford a lawyer, where do you think I will get resources? Medical treatment, to ensure replacement of your equipment so that you can be able to continue doing your work. And remember that human rights defenders are spread all over the country. Here in Kampala you have urban, but we have grassroots human rights defenders who are dealing with real issues related to land, related to environment, related to access to justice, related to service delivery, who speak out on these issues of corruption, governance issues, service delivery in the medical sector, and they are always under threat and attack as a result of their speaking out. And we need to reach out to them. Now, how do you reach someone in Chanamukaka, someone in Kotido, in the sub-counties there in the village? You find most services are urban-based, as opposed to those are the grassroots. Yeah. Those are some of the challenges we're facing.
Okay. There is also this thing where oftentimes when human rights defenders stand up to speak against any sort of injustice, they are either mistaken for those that are trying to oppose the government, or sometimes, just to copy the speaker's word, that you're being funded by bum shafters to cause commotion in the country and to cause instability in the country. Is this true?
So, one would need to understand, because for every allegation, he who alleges has the burden of proving. Yeah. So, human rights defenders or human rights organizations like ourselves do receive funding, both locally and abroad. What are our local sources of revenue? All members pay subscription fee. For example, you, Adrian Mukalas, if you were to join, you are supposed to pay 100,000 as a member of the coalition. Organizations pay 200,000. Those are the local we receive. We also receive grants from it, but we also receive donations from other international actors who admire the work that we do, just like governments receive money from foreign countries. The very foreign countries that give government money give also civil society organizations money. So we all receive money from it. And this money is checked. So it's not meant to come and do illegal activities. It is meant to do activities that are recognized by the law. Are we together? Yeah, so that is, I think people who make those allegations have the burden to prove it. And some you find are meant to divert the public from attending the real issues that human rights defenders are raising. Issues of corruption, bad governance, issues of poor service delivery, issues of lack of participation. We are now discussing a coffee bill, isn't it?
Yeah.
To what extent are farmers involved in this debate, as opposed to the representatives who have been sort of held hostage? To what extent is the farmer in Chanamukaka making an input on whether or not we should have the regulatory body remain as autonomous body as opposed to taking it to the line ministry? So when you speak about those issues of governance, then some people are not happy. And I told you at the beginning of our talk show that the work of human rights defending is not a tea party. It means speaking truth to power. It means stepping on people's toes, so to speak. So we have actors, whether state or non-state, who do not want to be held accountable, or who think their decisions matters more than the rest of society, and therefore what they decide, they've decided on your behalf, even without your input. So when you speak out, then you have become a burden. You are a problem, and therefore we should crush you.
You're opposing the
You're opposing the government. Yet you're trying to exercise your fundamental right to participate in the governance affairs of your country. It's provided for under Article 38. Unfortunately, as they always say, we have a poor reading culture. This constitution has been in existence this way since 1995. If you asked randomly on the street there, many people on the provisions relating to Chapter 4, the whole Bill of Rights, you'll find very few people can tell you that these are rights. Some interpret them as these are privileges. This is what government has offered us. You get it? As opposed to knowing them as fundamental freedoms and rights.
Okay.
So a society which doesn't want citizens to hold them accountable doesn't prosper, because you are squeezing them and deciding things without their input, yet they are the stakeholders of this country.
Well, for all the interventions that you have had and the empowerment you have done to the defenders, are you convinced that there is a level of awareness of human rights that has been achieved?
Yes, there is, and the levels of civic competence have gone so high, and that's why you are getting a backlash from the state. You see, an empowered society is not easy to manipulate. You can't easily distribute salt and bar soap always to them. You can see now the coffee sector is causing tremors. And do you know why it's causing tremors? The ordinary coffee farmer is getting a lot of money. If a kilogram of coffee has reached as far as 13,000, 13.5 per kilo, it shows you that their level of economic independence and financial independence is going to be boosted, and therefore will not be easily manipulated come 2026. And that is what you should be looking at. You see, a society which is poor, marginalized, is very easy to govern, as opposed to a society which is very empowered. When you are empowered, tell me how I can start fooling you, Mukalas, and tell you, Mukalas, no, you don't do this, do this. No, you tell, no, I know my choice, and I know someone who can deliver on services. So it's very hard to manipulate a society that is empowered, a society whose civic competences are high, and that's what it means. Yeah. So if you have a society, then you will see them questioning every decision that you make, and therefore you can't manipulate them. And if you are not a genuine Democrat, then it's not, you shouldn't be having an empowered society, because they will undermine you in your autocratic rule.
You talked about most of these defenders actually being so prominent in urban centers, and the rural setups or the rural centers remain left out. What are you going to do about the imbalances?
So you see, that's a very good question and a big challenge to us. For me to be able to go to the sub-counties and operate there, first of all, I must have an enabling environment. The law must allow me. Now we have new measures and administrative measures that have been put in government, that for you to be working in a district or a sub-county, you must have an MOU with that sub-county. So you see it. That is not really enabling, it's disabling. If you want to know what I'm doing, I can easily share with you my work plans and budget. But you don't have to really legislate that for me to do, I must have an MOU with you. That's quite tricky. But two, resources. NGOs do not have resources. In societies that are progressing or are progressed, you find citizens like Mukala says, in spite of my low income, I admire the work of human rights defenders. I dedicate 2,000 shillings every month to be deducted from my salary. We haven't reached those levels where citizens can say that I admire the work of human rights defenders, and therefore I'm going to make my humble contribution. Let them deduct 700 shillings every month automatically If you had, then you even this story of what you hear that we are foreign funded would not. So we have a challenge to reach out to those grassroots women. But we're trying to make sure that we localize our services so that now, if I have resources to support a human rights defender in a sub-county X somewhere, I should make them organize themselves in sub-regional coalitions and send money there to cater for grassroots, not them to write to Kampala and be able to look after their issues at that level. So it's a long journey, but we have started it to ensure that this human, and also we have tried to empower them to be able to do their own resource mobilization and responding to grants, responding to calls for proposals, so that they can also get resources to protect them as and when they are under threat of attack.
Okay. When we talk about awareness, you realize that now you have the defenders who have been empowered, but what about the locals? Because I believe that this is all aimed at creating awareness and empowering the locals to always stand up each time they realize that their rights are being violated. But even here in Kampala, for example, you realize that very many people have their rights being violated, but they fear to speak out because they know, and oftentimes you see people, relatives of those that are being imprisoned, when you interact with them, you realize that they even fear to speak out, that maybe this person had their right to demonstrate with a placard. They didn't incite anyone, they only raised up their placard and say, stop corruption. But the family even fears to talk about that. They think they are annoying maybe someone. What are you doing about that, especially convincing the public that you have these rights and you're not begging for the rights that you're entitled to?
It's a good question, and you see, in this country, the institution that is mandated for civic awareness on human rights is the National Human Rights Institute, the Uganda Human Rights Commission. But you see that right now, one of the biggest challenges they have is resources, underfunding. That is basically their core work, to ensure that citizens know their rights, they are able to demand and defend them. But if a National Human Rights Institution has no money to do that, what about civil society, our own? So it's a long journey, and we really need to use combined efforts. For example, working with the media. Our members are supposed to be creating awareness to citizens wherever they are. We have been also advocating for certain laws that would enable citizens to speak up. For example, you know how costly it is for one to hire a lawyer. But they've been asking for a law to do with providing legal aid, the legal aid bill. One of our member organizations called the Legal Aid Service Providers Network, LASPNet, has been advocating with. But the government thinks that's a lot of money. It cannot put it in terms of the cost of operationalizing that law in case it is passed would be very expensive. But what's not expensive for citizens? If it's something for citizens, that's good enough. Because if citizens cannot afford legal aid, then it becomes very difficult for them to exercise their fundamental freedom. Because all of the time they will be in fear. And that's what you're saying, that people fear, even when we have a constitution that guarantees them these rights. So it's going to take some time, but we need to create awareness. But with over time, with education, as young people go to school, you know that this population, over 70% are under 30. Young people will know their rights, and I can assure you they will assert themselves. It's a question of time. It's just a question of time. The first for us, the old ones who may not know human rights, but they are young people and they are a majority, I can assure you, they will speak out on their rights. The so-called Gen Zs and whatever are so empowered. The question is whether they will be able to speak out their rights and collectively go with responsibilities, because rights and responsibilities go together. When you are demanding for your rights, you should also know that your rights have corresponding obligations. For example, you cannot complain about poor service delivery when you are evading taxes, when you don't want to pay taxes. But when you pay taxes and you see poor roads, you should demand for services. You should demand for drugs, because you have paid your part. Let the one person who has received the revenue also You should ask them to account for the revenue they've collected and ensure that money collected by URI is not misappropriated, is not misused, is not put into non-productive sectors, as we see these days.
Okay. So do you have a provision for supporting, especially those people who are detained unlawfully, but they are not human rights defenders?
Unfortunately, no. So my clientele are human rights defenders. There are other organizations that provide support to such people. Even the justice centers, that's the legal arm of government that provides legal aid to people who cannot afford. Those ones can fall in that. Even the Law Society does it. For indigent persons, people who cannot afford a lawyer, they can. The Law Society has schemes where, services where they do it. And other organizations that support women and children who are in conflict with the law but cannot afford services of a lawyer. So there are organizations that do it. Now these organizations, if they are under threat or attack as a result of that provision, then I come in to support them.
As we wind up this discussion, what are your closing remarks on our discussion today?
I would call every citizen, I call upon every citizen to be a human rights defender. A human rights defender does not require you to be a legal scholar or to have specialized in. No, it is you seeing an injustice and you speak out. Don't walk away. Don't walk away. For example, let me see. We had a nasty incident in Wakiso over a truck, a fuel truck. Chigogwa. Where a truck rolled and people. Ordinarily, any citizen should have tried to stop others from getting closer and mobilizing others to move away. That work by telling others to move away from the scene, that action is a human right. You are a human rights defender. Rather than getting a camera and you are recording what's happening. You don't record a man or a woman beating another, domestic violence, and you occupy all your time recording instead of trying to call either police and stop this act or separating these two. You are busy recording. You are recording people who are involved in an accident instead of trying to assist them. So my call is everybody should be a human rights defender. Don't see an act of injustice and keep quiet and say tebinkwatako. Bijaku kwatako tomorrow. Tomorrow it will be you. So speak out. And that's the only way we can change this country. If nobody is going to come out there and change this country, it's we to speak out and say an injustice to one is an injustice to everybody.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Chirenga.
Thank you, Mr. Mukasa.
We are really grateful, at least for the enlightenment. At least now I know that from today onwards, we shall not confuse human rights defenders with political activists. Thank you so much. We are really grateful, and to you, our viewer, thank you so much for keeping it on Church of Uganda Family TV from way back we started from up to now. This has been Issues at Hand. Adrian Austin Mukalazi is my name. Have yourselves a blessed day. We meet again tomorrow.
Issues at Hand, powered by
Protea Hotel by Marriott Entebbe. Comfort and luxury at its best.